What scientific experiment would you run if money and ethics weren't an issue? Story 1. Genetic altering of humans. I don't currently have an issue with anyone that wants to do it on themselves. However, to do it to an embryo or through the parent's DNA to see what could do to advance humans would be amazing. Alterations to intelligence, memory, physical attributes, gills to swim underwater, visual alterations to see the full light spectrum and hearing for the full sound spectrum, immunity to all diseases and harmful bacteria, and ability to eat almost anything for sustenance. Cat girls. Can you imagine the existential crisis you'd have if you found out you and your whole subspecies were created to satisfy weebs? Story 2. The Gilligan's Island Experiment. Shipwreck 100 people with vastly different backgrounds, wealth disparity, and personalities on a remote island. See what kind of civilization grows from it. Then do it 50 more times to check the results against each other. Someone wrote a book about this. Basically, there are a number of case studies. You might find it interesting. Look it up. They're called shipwreck societies. There's also an island in the South Pacific, Pitcairn Island, whose inhabitants, around 50, are the descendants of the mutineers of HMS Bounty. Their society, basically taking advantage of kids, which when brought to trial, included their lawyers arguing that they didn't know it was illegal. The British government had to build a prison, especially for them. Story 3. Not necessarily a scientific experiment, but a series of experiments to see how you can control nerve sensations from the brain, and whether you can create VR that can perfectly mimic the sensation of touch whilst being motionless. As if you're moving and touching something in virtual world but not in the real world. Is that even possible? Story 4. Teach a kid the wrong words for everything and see how long it takes for them to adapt. A few people have commented that this is the same as learning a second language, and I want to address why that is not the case. When you learn a second language, you're assigning a new word that has no previous meaning to you to a concept that you already know. So you know what an apple is and you stack pomme on top of that when you learn it in French. But you aren't learning a new word. You're taking a word that already is assigned to another concept and trying to apply it somewhere else, while forgetting the original connection. Your brain isn't good at breaking neural connections, so you have to start thinking that you take a bite out of a car, or apple, and you get in your roof, car, to drive to blue, work. This is much more difficult because your brain automatically tries to learn new things, but has no good mechanism for forgetting. Based on comments, it seems that some have experienced this with single-word swaps, and it has been very difficult to overcome. I'm inclined to think that this would actually break someone. Experiment deemed unnecessary. I read a short story where a man did this to his daughter, and she ended up not saving him inadvertently because she was asked if there was anyone in the burning house he was trapped in, and she said no while meaning yes. Story 5. I want to see if the same franchise of a restaurant chain in demographically similar areas would have different amounts of profit, based on whether they let the employees be mean to customers if they want. Story 6. Put 100 babies from different countries on an island with a bunch of mute caretakers, then see what their language would sound like. Story 7. I'd raise a group of children from birth to adulthood, kinda a Truman Show thing, without any contact with music and see how it affects their lives and personalities. I'd make sure everything else would be normal, but music would be edited out of their lives. Story 8. How long a separated head stays conscious. All we have are anecdotes that might have been exaggerated. I've always wanted a definitive answer, ethics. It's been done. Around 7 to 10 seconds. So you gotta start planning on your last words now because you won't have time then. My current is, I'm going to head out. You won't have lungs, boss. Story 9. See if a monkey tribe could become dominant over the rest by training them to make and use weapons and other primitive technology. Also interested in seeing if they would take their newfound knowledge and begin to expand an empire. Story 10. I want to send someone to space without a spacesuit. I've read everything that can happen, I just want to see it on film. Story 11. How athletes from different sports react to fight or flight. Even further, would they fight differently than others? Story 12. There are a ton of geoengineering experiments that I'd love to run if they weren't, number 1, illegal, number 2, insanely expensive, and number 3, non-zero possibility of death and destruction. Iron fertilization. Basically dumping tons of iron dust into the ocean to cause an algae bloom, which should sequester a bunch of carbon and help mitigate global warming. Cloud seeding, space mirrors, dropping a nuke into a volcano, normal stuff. Story 13. Breed bears down to little pet-sized lap bears. Maybe 50 pounds? Polar bears, black bears, grizzlies, pandas, you name it. Is it too much to ask to have my own little bear buddy? He would go everywhere with me. Roll around, hang on my back, wear sunglasses, ride shotgun and hug me when I'm upset. The scientific community has failed us. We have pugs but no lap bears? Unfair. Story 14. I would breed and engineer dogs to become more intelligent until they can understand the concept of, I'm coming back soon, don't worry. They deserve it for helping us get this far as a species. If you like our content and love listening to our stories, please press the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you'll get updated for our future uploads. Thanks for watching. Now back to our stories. Story 15. Have an Olympics where every single athlete is juiced up to an insane level. I think it would raise what is possible by today's standards drastically. Then have an average person compete alongside them to show the disparity. Imagine Lane 1, Usain Bolt juiced up, Lane 2, Jim from accounting. Story 16. I'd want to see what a society of children would do on their own if they were alone from birth. Of course, adjustments would have to be made for when they were infants, but beyond that, how would they develop language, ethics, mythology, culture? And as they get older, how would they handle coming of age without adult role models? Though unethical, I think an experiment like that would answer a lot of questions about sociology, psychology, anthropology, and philosophy. It would be like watching the beginning of human society from scratch, with no external influence. Story 17. Near-death experiences and what people see. So basically, I'd want to bring a person near death's door and then bring them back to life. I'm sure a lot of them wouldn't make it back. Story 18. Brain transplants from humans to animals and vice versa. But I'm thinking that the physical biology is too different from that specific cross-species surgery to work. Maybe start between humans, do a swap and see if they fare. Yeah, but imagine watching a dolphin in a human body figuring out how to move and adapt. Story 19. I've actually thought a ton about this. I would put two people through the exact same conditions their entire life. Now, I'm not talking just similar scenarios, but everything. From the weather inside the womb to the humans they interact with, to the wind every day, and I would see if they're the same. Essentially, if humans are born with personalities or we develop them through little things all our life. Essentially, the butterfly effect. This probably wouldn't even be possible with infinite money, but it would be cool. Story 20. I train gorillas in weightlifting and really see how tanked they can get. Boost them with steroids along the way. After that, I take my army of beasts, pump them full of hard substances, and let them loose in an empty shopping mall. Want to see which stores they like and which ones they don't, for science and stuff. Story 21. I've always wanted to try to breed a winter blooming rose. Ethics are fine, but the cost of having that many roses in a hothouse, and the decades of selective breeding most likely required to accomplish it, would cost an astronomical amount, so I'm sticking with it. This is one of the most interesting replies I've read that isn't cruel or obscure. It seems so simple and achievable, yet I fully understand the ridiculous amount of money and work involved as you described it, to achieve the desired outcome. Story 22. How would the world react to a mound of 100 billion pennies for free in the middle of a major area? This sounds so dumb, but is really interesting if you think about it. Story 23. Redesigning the human sinus. I wish to find a way to modify the body to fix that mess of an airway. Story 24. Juice up the absolute heck of some kids and make some next-level humans that can run ridiculously fast and jump crazy high. Then make the superhuman Olympics and figure out what humans are really capable of. Story 25. Pizza that has the nutritional value of a salad. Now we're talking. Story 26. Dinosaur cloning. What else is there to do? Humans have quite a few movies that tell you that dinosaur cloning is a bad idea. Story 27. I will make 5 subjects of sane and healthy minds placed in a facility with 5 psychopaths and insane criminals. They will have group activities in a pair of 2 from each group, and the activities will be of 2 types, moral and immoral. Then I will conduct results about how much of these activities affect the subjects in both groups. They're not in prison, they're just being volunteers. Prison is a totally different scenario, and the Stanford Prison Experiment had totally different outcomes. This group of 2 will go through activities together, but the criminals are not allowed to murder their partner or anyone else in the experiment. Story 28. Raise a child without ever punishing or rewarding them. Just let them do whatever they want, and then see what happens to their behavior when they age. Story 29. Selective breeding in humans in order to get a solid knee, because that is breaking way too easily. Story 30. Have a baby human raised by apes, basically to see if the Tarzan scenario would occur and if the human is able to communicate fully with the apes. Story 31. Throw 2 groups of toddlers, separated by gender, on 2 separate islands. Provide them food via robots and not teach them anything regarding gender, sex, race, language, etc., and see how they develop and never mention to them the opposite sex, and have them be racially diverse too. It would answer so many questions regarding psychology, i.e., is orientation a product of nature or nurture? Are humans born with innate gender roles? Are humans naturally tribal and or xenophobic, etc.? Story 32. I'd run a serial killer contest. First person to successfully kill and score 50 people receives $10 million 1 year after the last victim if they're not caught by authorities and if they can prove the kill. How many people would undertake this? How many victims would there be? Can I just say, if they created a show or series with this plot, I'd definitely watch it. Story 33. Force compliance and specific diets with a diverse sample of people and a well-regulated control group. Follow for 10 plus years. Is veganism really healthy? How about paleo? Should we never be eating gluten or dairy? This has definitely not been done before because there are several problems with this kind of study. You can't force people to comply with a diet, which is the first hurdle. You could have people voluntarily report what they eat. This isn't a randomized trial and has its own issues. Recall issues, compliance, self-selection bias, etc. You're also missing a good control group to compare results to. Then, if there is a population that follows a certain diet, say people from the Mediterranean are following the Mediterranean diet, you run into the problem of correlation versus causation. There could be something different about their lifestyle that is explaining the health differences besides diet. Same issue as above, no control group. There's also the huge issue of not having a longitude study. Most short-term trials examining diets are just that, short-term. It's hard to ascertain if there are health effects that show up 10 or 20 years down the road. Also, people claim that they quote-unquote know what diets are healthy and unhealthy. I'm sure that's true of some diets and types of foods, and research non-experimental data, even with its flaws, can point us in the right direction. I'd feel pretty good saying that eating more vegetables is healthier for the vast majority of people. Eating Doritos is not healthy for the vast majority of people. But there is so much we don't know about optimal nutrition and how different populations react to food. I'd love to see an actual high-quality experiment. You can't experiment on prisoners. This seems to be a common question. Even an experiment you feel is benign is unethical. Prisoners are unable to properly consent because they, rightly, feel their liberty is at stake for consenting. They are therefore not able to consent to an experiment, which means you can't run it. Most of the laws and norms that were passed stating this was conceived after World War II. Story 34. Put a baby in a pure white room at room temperature and find a way to keep them alive with no human interference. What would they do for their whole life? Story 35. Oh, this is one that I have thought of extensively. The one key, however, is that in addition to a lack of ethics and infinite money, it would also require a few technologies to advance further than they have. Solve the age-old question of nature versus nurture. It would require a large number of cloned infants of at least 20 gene lines. Each gene line would have half of the clones raised, as recommended by the leading childcare experts at the time. The other half would be raised in a way designed to create individuals with as many negative personality traits as possible. In order to ensure all clones were raised identically, their care and human interactions would be done by human facsimile robots, controlled via advanced AI able to deal with unexpected situations on the fly. Doing this is pretty much the only way that question could be solved, but I hope no one does. Story 36. I would try to raise Mantat's Dune style. More specifically, I would take young children and subject them to an extremely demanding teaching and testing regime. Then I would use the results to try to find out, as early as possible, which children would fare better, and improve the quality of teaching and conditioning, largely to make their first allegiance be the school. After a few decades, I think that we might get a system to generate geniuses pretty much on demand, and naturally. The best of them would be tasked with leading and refining further the teaching. Story 37. Honestly, I'd like to see to what degree humans could be bred for certain traits. Sheer size and strength, being small and agile. Think of the massive amount of variety in dog breeds and then transfer that to people. It could even be attempted for crazy stuff like temperament, inclination, and instincts. Someone who's got crazy situational awareness because they come from a line of hunters whose lives are in danger at all times, versus someone who was bred and raised to be a leader or something. People who grow tons of hair and breed them together, versus people with little to no hair. See what they look like in 200 generations. That or do whatever's necessary to figure out teleportation, and closed system ecosystems, and weird stuff regarding relativity and time. Story 38. What would happen if you stuck a group of sterile narcissists on an island and made them create a society without social media? What would the resulting hierarchy look like? How would they create a social structure? What rules would be dictated by them? And how would they act around people that would manipulate them as well? Story 39. Reactivating ancient genes in living animals. We're bringing back mammoths through elephants, toothed dinosaurs through chickens, you name it. Story 40. Get a woman pregnant in space and see how a baby develops in zero gravity. I would say this would be very useful research. Story 41. I would do the classic idea for reality TV. Take 10 straight guys, make them all stay in a house together, and tell them that there are 9 gay guys and one of them is a straight guy. If they can vote out the straight guy, whoever's left in the house gets to split $1 million. However, if the straight guy makes it to the top 3, he gets the $1 million. The fun twist is that they are all straight and think that they're the only straight guy. So now you have 10 straight guys actively trying to act gay, probably horribly stereotypically, and cliché. The more manly and homophobic the guys are, the better the results. Story 42. I want to assess the Milgram obedience experiment. Super interesting. The basic principle is that anyone will do horrible things with enough coaxing. Story 43. The 21-gram experiment refers to a scientific study published in 1907 by Duncan McDougall, a physician from Haverhill, Massachusetts. McDougall hypothesized that souls have physical weight and attempted to measure the mass lost by a human when the soul departed the body. McDougall attempted to measure the mass change of 6 patients at the moment of death. One of the 6 subjects lost 3/4 of an ounce, or 21.3 grams. Wikipedia. The experiment was done with poor controls and abysmal sample sizes and was only ever done once. It was written off as an attempt at a whack job to prove the existence of the soul, but no one has ever repeated it. What I would want to do is do something with much tighter controls and sample sizes in tens of thousands instead of a measly 6. The questions that may be asked as a result might be reprehensible, but I believe it's worth at least checking. Story 44. Want to see what our mind could handle? Like, can our mind comprehend something incomprehensible? So basically summon Cthulhu and see what happens? Story 45. I would run a reproduction experiment of the Stanford prison experiment. There are so many unanswered questions about that, which I think could have tremendous benefits to society. But for obvious reasons, that way of conducting experiments isn't kosher. Story 46. How to make brains like Ghost in the Shell, either enhancing them to work with a mechanical body or transferring the consciousness to a computer. It is the kind of experiment where ethics and money really get in the way, but being able to become cyborgs who can live a really long time would really open up space exploration, alternatively playing around with DNA to stop or severely slow down aging. Story 47. Dispose of all the world's leaders simultaneously and see how things pan out. Not just the leaders of nations, but all the leaders of billion-dollar businesses as well. Story 48. Somewhat repeat The Village. Get adults on board to raise a generation of children without ever mentioning anything about deities or the heavens. I'm curious to know if the kids would ever ask if there was something up there, or beyond our mortal sphere, or if they'd ever generate a god concept later in life. Story 49. Attempting to create ape-ape and ape-human hybrids. There were some very, very small-scale experiments in the 50s, but it wasn't done with our understanding of genetics. I would want to have a large study group of each species, and see if bonobos can interbreed with chimps, and if either can breed with humans. Likely it wouldn't come to anything, but it would at least put the question to bed. Story 50. Create multiple exact clones of a person and raise them in entirely different environments. Different parents, different countries, some with siblings, others without. Some parents supportive, others abusive, to see how much influence an environment has on someone's development. Story 51. Banning Fortnite for a month and seeing how children's behavior changes. They're gonna call you the boomer that you are and play something else for a month. Story 52. I'd really want to know what happens if you transplant a whole brain. Will the brain's owner take control of the new body, or will the owner of the body take control of the new brain? Story 53. Put 1, maybe 2 people on an island with no contact with humanity and every need met and see if they find a higher power. Story 54. Take a series of uninhabited and undeveloped islands in a chain. Islands with sufficient and equal natural resources. Blockade the islands, not allowing anything in or out. Then put the world's top 10 CEOs, all from different fields, and put them in charge of these islands. 1 CEO per island. Give them a population of 500 office workers and enough food, water, and medicine for 6 months, as well as a small supply of blankets and firewood, and enough cheap tents for the population. Start them out at the tail end of winter. Aside from said supplies, they're given no tools or infrastructure. They must survive for a decade. Then the cordon is lifted, and the individual islands are no longer blockaded, only the island chain itself is. Now, the surviving groups can interact. They must survive another decade. All islands are heavily monitored by satellites. The airspace over the chain is a no-fly zone. All of the population are tagged with monitoring chips and, unbeknownst to them, have AV implants implanted in their heads to record their actions. Provides a plethora of scientific and anthropological studies, as well as entertainment. Have paid streams and televised edits. Also, study people's reactions to and consumption of said media. Story 55. As soon as a human is born, I'd have them deprived of all senses. Basically keep them in a float tank with earplugs and tape over their eyes, IV some nutrients and such, until they were a full-grown adult. Then I would take them out of the tank and let them go and see what happens. Story 56. I would love to get some people to raise children in an area considered to be haunted. You don't want the kids to ever hear of ghost stories or anything along those lines. A childhood full of happiness but cut off from civilization. Then see if they have any spooky goings-on without ever knowing things like that are potentially possible. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this next video. The YouTube algorithm really thinks you like it.